All right, let's get started with part two of our History of Physical Activity lecture. Let's share our screen and get started with discussion. All right, so now we're in America. So this whole time we've been over in Europe, and now we are in early American to present day. We're going to look at physical education and sport. So first, starting with Native American sports. And so our Native Americans did a lot of physical activities and they did engage in sports as well as dance. This occupied a lot of their downtime. They had a lot of leisure time where they were able to do recreational activities. Sports were closely aligned with their social, spiritual, and economic aspects of life. Um, you can think a lot of hunting, fishing, canoeing, archery. So lots of things they did for survival, but then they also had activities such as foot races. They did dancing, they played lacrosse. And so very similar activities that we see today for those engaging in recreation, very similar to a lot of the Native American activities. Physical activities in the colonies. So think early 13 colonies, 1800 or 16 to 1800s. Um, Prime motivator for physical activity was actually survival for males. It was a lot of hunting, fishing, growing crops, where women performed domestic type chores, keeping the household or keeping the household, washing, doing all the cleaning, different child rearing activities. There were some leisure time for recreational activities. But in the early time frame, it was on the rarer side. But once we got kind of more so 1800s, we did see a little bit more of that. Some of the recreational stuff was again with the barn raising, fox hunting, fishing, and then like I said, they did do some game type activities for fun. Looking at 1840 to the 1900s, we're going to talk about industrialization and westward expansion, which I find this topic kind of cool. Industrialization, we know, is the creation of large companies, corporations, factories, where we had a lot of workers working in very tiresome conditions. And the westward expansion, from coming over to establishing our 13 colonies, moving across the country to gaining land or finding land. Some of the big topics we see here is first is continued integration of body, mind, and soul. So we had, again, taking that Greek ideal of the man of action, man of wisdom, putting it together and thinking about this holistic approach to health, where we're training physically, but we're also doing intellectual and educational training. Boston Conference on Physical Training was a big conference, obviously in Boston, where these professionals in the field, these educators, came and discussed that males should be performing vigorous type exercise, where females should only be doing moderate exercise. The moderate exercise was suggested for females because they thought vigorous exercise would actually harm their reproductive system, and there's no point or purpose for females to engage in vigorous exercise. But moderate was suggested to be okay. There was also a lot of gymnastic systems during this time. There's like the battle of these German gymnastics and Swedish gymnastics. So all these different European calisthenic exercises where it combines Greek activities and knightly activities and modern calisthenics. And they put it together and they created all these different exercise programs for youth, kind of in like up and coming schools and colleges during this time. We also had the creation of the YMCA and YWCA training schools, which we'll discuss. So here is briefly a discussion of the gymnastics program. So the battle of the systems. I don't like to spend a lot of time on these systems because I just don't find them very exciting. But we have German gymnastics, which was the purpose was to prepare young boys for war or emergencies, which again is very important. So developing strong, healthy youth. With the German gymnastics, they did just a lot of military type training, a lot of like knightly type training. Swedish gymnastics help to promote health, expression of oneself, and the beauty of performance, or like aesthetic type performance. There was another person who created this Hitchcock program, which said that exercise is how we emphasize hygiene and being healthy hygienically. Sargent system helped to develop the body through individualized exercise, which is great. I do agree in customized exercise programs for each individual. And then association gymnastics was created by these YMCA directors, which helped to develop the all-around male. So again, these gymnastic systems, there's a lot that actually goes into all these different programs, but just kind of understand that these programs, again, originated in Europe and came over to America. And it was a combination of Greek activities, knightly activities, modern calisthenics that was just like an exercise program to help to develop young youth. The YMCA is cool, though. This is a fascinating story. So YMCA founded 1844 in England, and then came over to Boston. And so our first one was in Boston in 1851, which is so early. It's just a long time ago. And then the YWCA founded in 1866, also in Boston. Then there's these training schools in Springfield, Massachusetts, where they helped to develop the all-around male. They did use the customization of these different gymnastics programs, the Swedish, the German, the Hitchcock, the Sargent, all these different gymnastics programs. If you look at these ancient pictures, we see a lot of calisthenics. We see some kind of like modern Olympics where we're doing like bars and rings and vaults. And then just different activities, again, to train the body physically. And so my question for most of my classes, what do you know about the YMCA today? Like, have you ever been a part of a YMCA program, YWCA? Like, what programs do they offer? They're obviously like a community-based program, sometimes offering free programs, or safe community spaces for people to go and be physically active, playgrounds. And so again, just kind of think about like, what do you actually know about the YMCA and what they do today? Continuing in this time frame, we have a lot of immigrants coming over from all of Europe, and they're bringing with them different sports and their traditions and clubs. And so sports clubs were very popular during this times, and they focused on a lot of the traditions. So we have a lot of Irish clubs, German clubs, just English, French clubs, coming over and playing their different sports, coming to America to experience the freedom that America has offered. We also see a lot of physical activity recommendations increasing in schools and colleges, which is great. Intercollegiate sports, we'll talk about this more in depth, where the students had control over the sports that they played in college in this time frame, rather than the university, which had actually no control or participation. Women's sports started to increase. We saw more women playing softball, tennis, started cycling, doing more common activities that males did. Volleyball was another one. And then we see more professional sports start coming about. Amateur sports were also really big during this time. And then there's something called the playground movement that we'll discuss. So let's first look at sports during this time. University students believe that sports should actually be informal. So informal, casual, and not intense. Remember, we talked about the British ideal, like sportsman, which is playing the game for the game's sake, which is actually not to be done very intensely, vigorously. It's just playing lots of different sports and not actually training really hard for it, just playing the sport for the game's sake. Kind of what they still thought of. They did not have any coaches. There was no faculty involvement. So the students were coaches. The students did purchase all their equipment, which kind of is cool down here. The first known sports between two colleges in the US is Rutgers and Princeton played rugby, and then Harvard and Yale had their first rowing competition. So Harvard and Yale rowing, and then Rutgers and Princeton their first rugby, which was rugby. Rugby came from Europe, England, and they took it and they tried to make football. So it's obviously where football came from, but it was like at this time it was like a mix between rugby and American football today. There were some problems with this, though. We saw a lot of injuries. There were property damage from the students and the fans. Absences, obviously, students going, like leaving class or traveling, they're not there playing their games. There was different confusion when it came to the rules, like I said, because they were creating American football during this time, but they were still taking European rugby and like mixing the two. And so rule confusion, there were sports betting, gambling, drunkenness of fans, commercialization started, loss of values. But there were benefits. Obviously, the students were very healthy. They had values such as, fair play, teamwork. The athletes obviously weren't drinking. They weren't using tobacco. It did reduce some rowdyism, but there was actually, rowdyism of the fans. There was more discipline of the athletes, and there was a lot of school spirit going on at this time. And so the faculty actually realized, hey, like sports actually may be a good thing. We should probably start including them. And so this is actually where the NCAA came about, which is super fascinating. So late 1800s, students started to unify various rules of sports. They said, okay, like if we're going to make our own American football and we're going to take rugby, we have to create rules, and there can't be any more confusion. Like we have to do this right. And so they started to do it right. And they also wanted to make sure that like injuries were taken into account. They were taken seriously. And they tried to get the faculty involved because there were some deaths from the sports. It was very, what's the word? Just, so, I guess just intense. It was so intense. So there were some deaths that occurred that the Harvard faculty said, okay, we probably need to start, like the students are going to play sports anyway, so we should probably get involved. Faculty attempted to sort of control class absences, to regulate the athletic abuse that was taking place, and said, okay, hey, we're gonna get some representatives together from all these different colleges in the New England area. And this led to the establishment of the NCAA. And the creation of the American football. They wanted to prevent injuries, prevent deaths, and they actually wanted to make it regulated to where it was actually a very successful program. And so this is the label, as you see at the bottom, of the NCAA, which again, is super fascinating. There's obviously so much more detail that goes into the creation of the NCAA. They had several meetings that started with like 2 faculty members, and then 5, and then 10, and they got different schools involved. And then they created basically just this group of faculty from all these different colleges and universities and created a program to oversee the athletics of the students. Again, it's really awesome. Okay, now talking about those amateur athletic clubs that I said was really popular during this time. These athletic clubs, mainly they first targeted just like younger athletes, like out of college, like in college, out of college, that wanted to continue playing in sports. So track and field, gymnastics, tennis, croquet, all the things. And that's when the New York Athletic Club was founded. And the New York Athletic Club today is still a very prestigious club, very expensive to join, and they produce a lot of Olympic athletes. The facility in New York, and there's other sites for the New York Athletic Club, where they have like state-of-the-art facilities. They have access to all this different type of services provided by this club. Again, a very prestigious club still today. And there's lots of different clubs around the country that are very similar to this original club that started. But this is the first one. And then they started to pay top athletes to compete for their clubs. And the New York Athletic Club still does that today. They're continuing to pay and provide services to these Olympians who go and compete for like New York Athletic Club or other clubs across the country. But this was also, this was kind of like a very popular thing at the time, was to join these prestigious clubs. Let's look at some sports and where they came from. So the socially elite did a lot of horse racing, gambling, dancing, and yachting. So going out on yachts. Baseball started in England, and then it didn't come to the US till the mid 1800s. We see cycling, late 1800s, started in Europe. Tennis was from England, golf from Scotland, croquet, cricket, also from England. The 2 sports that were actually created in the United States at the YMCA, basketball and volleyball. And I think that's a quiz question, maybe exam, but these 2 sports, basketball and volleyball, did come from the United States, from the YMCAs here. More so about the amateur athletics. We still have an amateur athletics union in the US today, kind of where it all began with these amateur athletes turning professional. There was a clash between the AAU and the Olympics and the NCAA, and they all had these different rules. Um, but then they all started to kind of decide to work together and work closely with the Olympic movement and to prepare athletes for the Olympic Games. Like I said, there were some conflicts at the beginning, but then they started to kind of come together and let's prepare the best athletes possible that we can from the United States to go to the Olympics. Playground movement, like I mentioned earlier, is obviously a movement that said, hey, we need to create some green spaces, some play areas for children, especially children living in inner cities. Think of New York in the 1800s, where we have this industrialization, lots of skyscrapers being built, lots of different apartment buildings, and there's no place for children to go outside and play after school. And sometimes schools didn't even offer recess and playtime at this like during this time frame. And so you can see these early playgrounds, which if I saw one of my children hanging on top of those high bars, I would not be very happy about it. But we see the Boston, New York, Chicago, all these different places, these bigger cities where they started to create these sandboxes, green spaces, playgrounds for children to get outside and play. And then the official playground movement started. There's a lot of history about that playground movement, or that Playground Association of America. Just talks about like how it all started, where the money came from. One thing I did read about Central Park is Central Park was in pieces owned by different wealthy businessmen in New York at the time. And then they started to either donate the land, or some of the land was auctioned off and turned into like the green spaces, the trailways, the different, lakes and parks and facility areas. And they all dedicated it to be like for recreation only, which again, is awesome to have these spaces for people to go and be active. All right, getting into next time frame is looking in 1900s, 1950s. Consumerism, immigration, and then more about democracy or democratization. Competitive sports became very popular for both males and females during this time. We have a lot of sports at the center of schools and colleges now. PE curriculums are very imperative. A lot of training for the military, World War I, World War II, brought new changes to being physically active and actually having high physical fitness levels. We then see the 1920s, golden age of sport, and then the Great Depression did occur, which actually increased leisure time because people were let off work. There was no businesses closed, shut down, and people didn't have anything to do besides be active. And then obviously we have our All-American Girls Pro Baseball League. That was our first sport for women at this time. One thing I want you to think about is golden age of sport, 1920s. Why was this era so captivated by sport? What changed in the world at this time that sparked this interest? So we had the creation of the radio, and sports were broadcasted across the radio, across all different states, across the country. And so people were able to tune in and listen to sports. So this was the first time that radio was introduced, or radio became mainstream. In this time, also, we had a lot of like obviously newspaper publications of writing about sports, reading about sports. They also started to create very large stadiums. And so stadiums were being built at colleges that held hundreds of thousands of people. Obviously, professional sports stadiums were being created that held people. And so everyone wanted to travel to these stadiums and go watch these sports live, which they've probably never done before. And so people were just consuming sports rapidly. And so it was this sports craze time. And it was also the end of the World War I had ended. And World War I had ended, and soldiers came home, and they had a lot of time for recreation. They were celebrating, and they wanted to enjoy their leisure time by engaging, like watching sports. The article also states this was the first golden age of sport. and that we are now in another golden age of sport. But our golden age of sport has spanned several decades because we've been sport crazed for a long time, and I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon with the creation of professional athletes. And another thing about in the 1920s is professional athletes were now like these idols and these celebrities that people looked up to, again, which they hadn't really had before. And so that's why this time frame was really obsessed with sports. Continuing in this time is degree programs in PE. And so usually at this time it was mainly just like if you got a degree in like a field of physical activity, it was in PE. But we then started to create doctoral programs in PE, and it kind of expanded a little bit more into like the physical therapy part of it, medicine kind of tied into it. American Physical Therapy Association, 1921. And where did these physical therapists actually come from? They were the World War I reconstruction aides. These reconstruction aides from World War I were young women who were trained in nursing, but they also had to get like more training when the soldiers came home who were wounded. And so they were, yes, trained as nurses, but they also had to do like rehabilitation type training. And so they did hydrotherapy in the water with the soldiers they were working on. They did massage therapy on the soldiers. They did like different type of exercises and physical activities. And then you combine all of that and put all of that together. And that's kind of where our physical therapists came from, and how this association started was from those World War I reconstruction aides. Coaches were very mainstream. It was no more students leading these different sports teams in colleges. And so we then have coaches now, and obviously coaches at our professional level. Athletic training did not come in until 1950. So at the end of this era, physical therapy kind of branched off of that into athletic training. Now we have all these sports, we have all these coaches, we have all these athletes who are getting hurt, and they need more than just physical therapy. They need more of a professional geared and trained in athletics and sports. And so that's kind of how that came about. Kind of looking more at our recreation movement by decade, just like brief little tidbits. 1930s, we have the Great Depression, but we have increased leisure time, which allowed people to engage in more sports and activities. 40s, industrial recreation. We have more facilities for athletics, more equipment provided to be active leisurely. 50s was a big outdoor recreation booth. So outdoor education movement, a lot of hiking, climbing, backpacking kind of was very popular. 60s, we see Lifetime Sport Foundation was created, which promoted carryover sports. Carryover sports are sports that you can do early as you're a young person all the way up and through for the rest of your life. So think of like tennis and golf and jogging, and any type of activity that requires very little equipment and very little like actual skill. But yes, it probably does require like physical capacity, but it's something you can do your entire life. 70s, 80s, we see this big fitness boom, a lot of jogging, running. This is when races, like running and races, became very popular. More tennis, racquetball, aquatic sports, so doing like aquatic water exercises. And in the 1990s, we saw a lot of personal trainers, a lot of like group exercise type classes that became very popular. Personalized fitness was another big one. And then we have 2000s. So first starting like with the like scientific knowledge education, a lot of curriculum started to grow. So we started to expand our curricula, including more classes, more subtopics for like our large kinesiology degrees. More professions came about from this. So realizing that more professionals are needed in the field. And more associations started growing, expanding, ACSM, NSCA, NATA, leading to statewide, regional, national conferences where people were traveling across the nation to collaborate and talk to other professionals in the field that are part of these different organizations. A lot more scientific research, journals started to grow, more education just kind of about various and wide range of topics regarding exercise, sports, physical activity, training, nutrition, all the different things related to health. And then the early 2000s, we saw this increase in health-related exercise, where we also have a lot of outdoor recreation and opportunities for people to instruct, like ski instructors and whitewater rafting instructors and leading cycling groups and kayaking and climbing, Everest hikes, all the different things. And so a lot of opportunities for people to get active outdoors, this became super popular. But then there was a decline. So there was a drop kind of in the early like 2010s-ish, where we saw this drop in physical activity levels. Now into the 2020s, we saw a lot of increased physical activity during the COVID-19 pandemic due to like the world was shut down. We didn't have work. Businesses were closed. Only essential businesses remained open. So if those working at an essential business, life probably didn't change much, but those who weren't, they had a lot of leisure time. And so it was a lot of walks. It was finding new hobbies. It was engaging in different exercises. And so we did see that boom. And then even after the COVID-19 pandemic in the last 5 years, some trends that have come about is a lot of wearable technology, such as our Apple Watches, which have been around longer and even before the COVID-19 pandemic, but even more popular with what they're able to do at this point. Biohacking is a term used to basically track what your body's doing, but then also like hack into and manipulate how your body's responding to things. This could be through drugs. So certain drugs that you can ingest or put on your body to make your body respond a certain way. Home gyms, very common. We built a home gym during the COVID-19 pandemic, which we still have. Virtual reality training, which we see, like, so using VR goggles to mimic something, so where you can see a fitness workout or you can play a sport and you can be active virtually, even if you're not there. Boutique fitness classes, like such as like a treadmill boutique where you have all these treadmills and you take running classes, or spin classes or Pure Barre classes or whatever the trend is. And then pickleball is very popular and common as well. And I know a lot of people who love that sport now. But yeah, so that's kind of it for this lecture. I hope you've enjoyed learning about how physical activity has started and how it has changed, and some things have stayed the same throughout these centuries and centuries of human civilization and engaging in exercise. But that's basically it. So I will see you guys in the next lecture.